My name's Leon Barron, I'm a GP, and I guess my path into cannabis really started about 2.5 years ago. And actually, like many other people across the UK, I was reading some of these high-profile media stories about children with epilepsy who were finding that cannabis oils were helping with their seizure control. And also at a similar time to that, I found out that a relative of mine in Israel was being prescribed cannabis oils, an elderly relative, but had seen her life transform in terms of symptom control and quality of life. So I became really interested in this subject matter and just began reading more and more about it. And what I found straight away was that there weren't that many resources that were just kind of written for doctors. And obviously none of us, particularly from my generation, learned anything about cannabis at medical school apart from the negative sides of cannabis, which we probably end up talking about a bit more about later. So I did a lot of my own reading and research and began to learn quite quickly that there was something very interesting about this. So I set a group up called the Primary Care Cannabis Network, and I always had the idea of trying to, first of all, build a community of GPs that were interested in learning about this and perhaps advocating more for it, and also working with other organisations that shared our vision, which ultimately is to increase access to these types of products through the NHS and through GPs. We've got more doctors signing up week to week. We're working with some other groups in the UK who share really common goals to get scripts to patients and to try and educate doctors and open up access. So yeah, it's been very interesting so far. And there's new developments week on week, which is really great as well. There are so many countries now across the world where cannabis has been legalised for medical use. And if you look at the majority of the 50+ countries now which have taken this step, you'll find that the bulk of prescribing is coming from GPs. And also, what you'll also find is that in many jurisdictions, the scripts are either fully funded or partially funded by government or health insurance companies, or they're relatively affordable for patients if they're prepared to pay for script. So I think it's really hard now not to, if you're a patient and you're here in the UK and you're struggling to get a script for a condition where there's clear evidence that you would benefit from a cannabis script, I think it's hard for those groups of patients or those individual patients to look across to Germany or Holland or Denmark or Canada and think, well, if I live there, I could get this very high quality product through my GP. And that's what motivates me really to try and get this conversation moving forward and try and get scripts to patients through GPs. I don't think we need more than, say, 5% of GPs in the UK to understand it and be confident in prescribing cannabis to serve the UK population. And I guess that cohort of GPs could then take referrals from colleagues, like you see in Canada or North America, where some doctors or GPs have developed this deeper knowledge of cannabis prescribing, and they will tend to take referrals from across the area or from colleagues within catchment area. So that's sort of how I envisage it could play out here in the UK. Obviously, the main problem we have at the moment is that GPs have not been allowed to initiate scripts. So we're actually allowed to prescribe under a shared care arrangement with a consultant, a specialist. But in reality, it's not happening. And there's a lot of reasons why that isn't happening. But I think had the UK allowed GPs to initiate a script and be prescribers, there would have been more of an uptake and more of an interest, because I think there'd be a bit more pressure on GPs to learn more about it. We have been taught over the years that it's traditionally could cause psychosis or have detrimental effects on the mind and so on. And actually, that for me was reinforced when I worked in psychiatry placements. So I did a number of inpatient jobs throughout my medical training, and I saw the negative sides of cannabis, but I saw the negative sides of street cannabis. Patients who were suffering with psychosis or bipolar, very unwell, unstable patients who, would go out on their leave and they'd smoke high potency skunk, and it would trigger a psychotic episode and they're back to square one. So I had a very negative view at one point on cannabis. But what we're talking about here is the illicit street cannabis that has been grown to get people high. I mean, the THC content in street cannabis now is way higher than it was, say, in the 1960s. It's full of pesticides, ammonia, fungus, some of it is, you don't know what people are using or smoking. And what we're finding now, and the evidence base is developing around this association with psychotic disorders and psychosis. And actually, I think where our current understanding really now is that, yes, in young developing brains, so adolescents, teenagers who are smoking high strength THC street cannabis, if they have an underlying genetic predisposition to psychosis, it could potentially trigger a psychotic episode. And that also applies for people who have had psychosis or they have a very strong family history. What we're understanding now is that those groups of patients should stay well away from high THC cannabis. But again, this is why, if we can medicalize this more and we can understand it more and understand the strains and what people might be using, then we can help those patients. We should be looking at observational data. We should be looking at, following patients up over a set period of time and looking at not perhaps even just one symptom, but a range of symptoms or quality of life scores and things like that. So it's a slightly different approach to say, a traditional pharmaceutical style study. But I think that's the approach we have to take with this, because this is clearly how, this is what we're facing with. We've got whole plant extracts majority of the time. There are obviously licensed medical products which have been through those types of trials, but they're very much focused on very specific conditions. So there's Sativex and Epidiolex, Nabilone, for example. But 2021 is really trying to gather a sort of more of an observational evidence base, longitudinal study where you can follow patients up over time. And because we know cannabis is very safe, then you can kind of do, you can gather data, you can also serve the needs of patients at that same time, you can build an evidence base. And hopefully that, that would be reconsidered when the regulatory authorities are looking at wider access and prescribing. And that's really what they're trying to do, is to serve the needs of patients whilst building more of an evidence base. There's a lot of problems now in general practice and in prescribing. We've got a huge problem with the overprescribing of opioids. Too many patients are prescribed too many unnecessary medications. Polypharmacy is a well-known problem in medicine. So, that can lead to falls in the elderly or side effects of, so many common medicines that we prescribe have problems and side effects. We also prescribe a lot of licensed medicines off license. So most of the pediatric drugs that are prescribed haven't been through these large clinical trials, because you cannot do those sort of trials in children. So most pediatric drugs are prescribed off license, as are many drugs that we prescribe for neuropathic pain or for fibromyalgia. Duloxetine, that's prescribed off license. Amitriptylin's often prescribed off license for many conditions. So, some doctors will sort of argue that, well, we don't want to be prescribing cannabis because it's not been through licensing or through the usual method, the rigorous sort of processes that we're used to. Well, actually, we're all prescribing quite a few medicines off license. So in my area, for example, if I refer a patient to a pain clinic, it can take up to a year for them to be seen. So what do? They come back and see myself or a colleague, and often they'll end up with other medicines being prescribed that often don't work for them, or they cause side effects. So we've by no means got the perfect system in place at the moment, and I just think cannabis could help some of these could help some of these complex conditions and complex patients perhaps who aren't benefiting from more traditional treatments. The way we work now as GPs is very different to how it was pre-COVID. Patients perhaps are taking a little bit more responsibility for certain aspects of their health. They're, because we had a time where it was very difficult, the access was very limited to GPs, or we were in such a crisis that actually patients weren't engaging so much, but now they are, but it's in a slightly different way. So there's a lot more telemedicine, video calls and things like that. So the attitudes to health have changed dramatically, and the way that we're delivering healthcare. So I don't know how that will translate into cannabis, but I think there's going to be very interesting avenues that open up, and I think patients are looking for slightly alternative ways of managing symptoms, or natural or holistic ways of managing certain things. What's become very clear, we live in a globalised society, and what COVID's done is shown us that, we're all, we're all connected, we're all very close. Some of the webinars we've done recently have been with North American prescribers, and it's very easy now to get groups together from across the world and talk about these things. And actually, the UK, yes, we're an island, but we need to sort of look beyond what we're doing here and start to work with countries and clinicians and academic institutions who are slightly ahead of where we are now, because we can learn so much from them.
My name is Sam Cannon, and I am the founder of Beyond Green. On the 2nd and 3rd of December this year, the UN will vote on the World Health Organization's recommendation on the rescheduling of cannabis. This is a mammoth moment in time. Please like, comment and share these videos so that the truth can be told, and that the planet and everybody on it can benefit from this truly, truly incredible plant once again. Thank you.